The prisoner-holding area was a small stone building with no windows, and only one heavily secured entrance. Marcus followed the medical team through the doorway, and immediately saw 3 of his missing teammates chained to the wall in various states of physical and psychological trauma. Corporal Williams was barely conscious, his left arm clearly broken and his face swollen from repeated beatings. Specialist Thompson sat motionless against the far wall, staring straight ahead with vacant eyes that suggested severe psychological damage. The 3rd prisoner was Private First Class Rodriguez, who had somehow maintained more alertness than the others despite obvious injuries to his legs and torso. When Rodriguez saw Marcus entering the room, his eyes filled with tears of relief and disbelief. He had assumed that Marcus was either dead or had abandoned them, never imagining that his squad leader would return with a rescue team. Dr. Sarah Kim, the medical officer with the rescue team, immediately began triaging the prisoners to determine who needed the most urgent care. Corporal Williams was in critical condition with internal injuries that required immediate evacuation to a proper medical facility. Specialist Thompson showed signs of severe dehydration and possible traumatic brain injury from head trauma. Rodriguez was stable but needed treatment for infected wounds on his legs. As the medical team worked to stabilize the prisoners for transport, Marcus learned the horrifying details of what his teammates had endured during their captivity. The enemy had captured them during the confusion following the initial ambush, when the squad had scattered across the rocky terrain seeking cover. Unable to reach the rally point due to intense enemy fire, the 3 soldiers had been cornered in a small ravine and overwhelmed by superior numbers. Their captors had interrogated them repeatedly about American military operations, troop strengths, and planned missions in the region. The questioning had been accompanied by physical torture designed to break their resistance and force them to provide classified information. Despite the pain and suffering, all 3 men had maintained their military discipline and refused to reveal sensitive details about their unit or mission. Private Rodriguez whispered to Marcus that a 4th prisoner had been with them until 2 days earlier. Staff Sergeant Miller had been taken away by their captors and had not returned. The guards had told the remaining prisoners that Miller had been executed for refusing to cooperate, but Rodriguez suspected this might have been psychological warfare designed to terrify the survivors into compliance. The revelation that Staff Sergeant Miller might still be alive somewhere in the area prompted immediate action from Captain Rodriguez and the rescue team leadership. Intelligence officers began interrogating captured enemy fighters to determine where additional prisoners might be held. The information gathered was fragmented and contradictory, but suggested that Miller had been moved to a different location for special interrogation. Marcus volunteered to accompany any mission to search for Staff Sergeant Miller, arguing that his familiarity with the terrain and enemy tactics would be valuable for the search effort. However, Captain Rodriguez ordered Marcus to return to the base with the rescued prisoners, noting that his primary responsibility was to ensure their safe evacuation and medical treatment. The helicopter evacuation from the mountain compound was complicated by enemy fire from positions that had not been neutralized during the initial assault. Enemy fighters had regrouped in caves and rocky outcrops around the compound and were attempting to prevent the rescue helicopters from landing. Suppressive fire from the helicopter gunships kept the enemy at bay, but the situation remained dangerous throughout the evacuation process. Corporal Williams lost consciousness during the helicopter flight and required emergency medical procedures to stabilize his condition. Dr. Kim worked frantically to control internal bleeding while the aircraft flew through mountainous terrain toward the base medical facility. Marcus held Williams's hand and spoke encouragingly to him, though he was uncertain whether his teammate could hear or understand the words. The flight back to Forward Operating Base Thunder seemed to take forever, though it actually lasted less than an hour. Marcus watched the landscape passing below and reflected on the dramatic changes in his situation over the past week. 7 days earlier, he had been preparing for what seemed like a routine reconnaissance mission. Now he was returning from a combat rescue operation that had saved 3 lives, but left many questions unanswered. Upon arrival at the base, the rescued prisoners were immediately taken to the medical facility for comprehensive treatment. Marcus was also required to undergo additional medical evaluation, as his participation in the rescue mission had involved physical stress that could have worsened his existing injuries. Dr. Morrison found that his condition remained stable, though she recommended several additional days of rest and observation. The debriefing process for the rescue mission was extensive and involved multiple intelligence agencies seeking to understand the enemy capabilities and intentions revealed during the operation. News of the successful rescue operation quickly reached higher military leadership and eventually the families of the rescued soldiers. Sarah received a telephone call from the military liaison office informing her that Marcus was safe and that he had participated in rescuing his captured teammates. The call provided few details about the operation itself, but confirmed that Marcus would be returning home soon. Emma was too young to fully understand the complexity of what her father had experienced, but she was excited to learn that Daddy would be coming home earlier than originally planned. Sarah struggled with mixed emotions about Marcus's involvement in the rescue mission, grateful that he was safe, but concerned about the risks he had taken immediately after surviving his own ordeal. The investigation into the intelligence failure that had led to the ambush revealed disturbing information about enemy infiltration of local Afghan military and government units. The mission details had apparently been compromised by an Afghan interpreter who was secretly working with the enemy. This individual had provided detailed information about the squad's planned route and timing, enabling the enemy to prepare the sophisticated ambush. Staff Sergeant Miller's fate remained uncertain despite extensive search efforts and intelligence-gathering activities. Several raids were conducted on suspected enemy positions in the weeks following the rescue operation, but no additional prisoners were found. Military leadership eventually concluded that Miller had likely been killed, though his body was never recovered and his status remained listed as missing in action. The psychological impact of the entire experience affected each rescued soldier differently. Corporal Williams recovered from his physical injuries, but struggled with survivor guilt and post-traumatic stress symptoms that required extensive counseling and therapy. Specialist Thompson's head injuries had caused memory problems that made it difficult for him to remember many details about his captivity experience. Private Rodriguez adapted relatively well to his return to normal military duties, though he experienced nightmares and anxiety that required ongoing mental health support. All three rescued soldiers were eventually awarded medals for their courage during captivity and their refusal to compromise military security despite severe torture and threats to their lives. Marcus was recommended for the Bronze Star Medal for his actions during the escape and rescue operations. The citation noted his exceptional courage in surviving alone behind enemy lines and his selfless dedication to rescuing his captured teammates despite personal risk. He was also recommended for early promotion to Sergeant First Class based on his demonstrated leadership and tactical competence. The entire squad was eventually rotated back to the United States for reassignment and recovery. Marcus was stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado, allowing him to live at home with his family while continuing his military career. The proximity to his wife and daughter provided crucial emotional support during his own recovery from the traumatic experiences in Afghanistan. Emma's 6th birthday party was held 2 weeks after Marcus returned home, fulfilling the promise he had made to her before deploying. The celebration was more meaningful than anyone could have imagined, representing not just another year of Emma's life, but Marcus's successful return from an ordeal that could easily have ended very differently. Sarah returned to her nursing duties at the hospital with a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices made by military families and the uncertainty that deployment brings to relationships. She became involved in support groups for military spouses, helping other women deal with the stress and anxiety of having loved ones in combat zones. Marcus continued to struggle with questions about whether he could have done more to prevent the initial ambush or to save Staff Sergeant Miller. Counseling sessions with military psychologists helped him understand that survival situations involve factors beyond any individual's control, and that his actions had ultimately saved lives rather than cost them. The lessons learned from the mission led to changes in intelligence procedures and operational security measures designed to prevent similar compromises in the future. The identification of the enemy infiltrator resulted in a broader review of security clearance procedures for local personnel working with coalition forces throughout Afghanistan. Marcus was offered the opportunity to remain in Afghanistan for a second deployment, but chose instead to accept a training assignment in the United States. His experience behind enemy lines and his participation in the rescue operation made him valuable as an instructor for other soldiers preparing for similar deployments. The bonds formed between Marcus and his rescued teammates remained strong long after their return to the United States. They maintained regular contact with each other and their families, creating an extended support network that helped all of them deal with the ongoing effects of their shared trauma. Annual reunions provided opportunities to honor the memory of the soldiers who had not survived and to celebrate their own continued survival. Years later, Marcus would reflect on the week that changed his life and recognize that the true victory was not just his own survival, but the successful rescue of his teammates and the preservation of military honor under the most challenging circumstances. The title, "The Return No One Behind Enemy Lines Expected," proved prophetic in ways that no one could have imagined when the mission began. Marcus's return to safety was unexpected, but his return to rescue his teammates was the truly remarkable achievement that defined his character and his legacy as a soldier and leader. Emma grew up knowing that her father was a hero, not because of the medals he received, but because of the choices he made when faced with impossible odds. The picture she had drawn of their family, which Marcus had carried through his entire ordeal, remained framed on his desk as a reminder of what truly matters when everything else has been stripped away. The story of Marcus Chun and his squad became a testament to the bonds between soldiers and the power of determination in the face of overwhelming adversity. It demonstrated that even in the darkest moments, hope and courage can overcome fear and despair, leading to outcomes that no one expected but everyone could admire. The guards at Forward Operating Base Thunder recognized Marcus immediately when he approached their perimeter. Staff Sergeant Chun was officially listed as missing in action, and his unexpected appearance caused immediate excitement and concern among the security personnel. Within minutes, he was escorted through multiple security checkpoints and brought to the base medical facility for evaluation. Dr. Captain Lisa Morrison examined Marcus thoroughly, documenting his injuries and assessing his physical condition. The head wound had healed reasonably well, but showed signs of infection that required immediate antibiotic treatment. His dehydration was severe, and his body weight had dropped noticeably during his 4 days in the mountains. Despite these challenges, his overall condition was remarkably good considering what he had endured. While receiving medical treatment, Marcus was debriefed by intelligence officers who needed to understand exactly what had happened during the failed mission. Major David Thompson, the intelligence officer, listened carefully as Marcus described the ambush, the separation of his team, and his subsequent journey to reach the base. Every detail was important for planning potential rescue operations. The news Marcus received about his teammates was mixed and deeply troubling. 2 members of his squad had been found dead near the original ambush site. Private Johnson and Sergeant Martinez had apparently died during the initial attack, their bodies discovered by a reconnaissance team sent to investigate when the squad failed to report in. The remaining 5 soldiers were still missing and presumed to be either captured, hiding, or possibly dead in terrain that had not yet been searched. Marcus felt overwhelming guilt about the loss of his teammates, even though the ambush was clearly not his fault. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, wondering if he could have done something differently to prevent their deaths or help the survivors. Major Thompson assured him that the ambush was sophisticated and well-planned, suggesting that intelligence about their mission had been compromised before they even left the base. The intelligence analysis revealed disturbing information about enemy activities in the region. The target they had been sent to observe was apparently much more important than initially believed. Abdul Rahman al-Masri was not just a local commander, but a key figure in coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout eastern Afghanistan. The enemy had gone to great lengths to protect him, including setting up the elaborate ambush that had destroyed Marcus's squad. Colonel James Patterson, the base commander, met with Marcus personally to discuss the situation. The colonel explained that military leadership was under pressure to either confirm the deaths of the missing soldiers or mount a rescue operation. However, the enemy presence in the target area had increased significantly since the ambush, making any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. Marcus volunteered immediately to guide a rescue team back to the area where his squad had been separated. He argued that his knowledge of the terrain and the enemy positions would be valuable for any mission attempting to locate survivors. Colonel Patterson was initially reluctant to approve Marcus's participation, noting that he had already endured significant trauma and needed time to recover. The debate about the rescue mission continued for several hours, with input from medical personnel, intelligence officers, and operational commanders. The primary concern was whether enough time had passed to make survivor recovery unlikely, and whether the risks to a rescue team were justified by the slim chances of finding anyone alive. During this time, Marcus was able to contact his wife Sarah through the base communications center. The conversation was difficult for both of them, as Sarah had been notified that Marcus was missing in action and had spent 4 days not knowing if he was alive or dead. Hearing her voice gave Marcus renewed strength and motivation to participate in efforts to find his missing teammates. Sarah told Marcus that their daughter Emma had been asking about him every day, not fully understanding why Mommy was crying so much. The kindergarten teacher had been helping Emma deal with the uncertainty, but the little girl was clearly affected by the stress in their household. Marcus promised Sarah that he would be careful and would come home safely, though he could not tell her about his plans to join the rescue mission. The decision to authorize a rescue operation was made late that evening. Intelligence reports suggested that at least some of the missing soldiers might still be alive, based on intercepted radio communications mentioning prisoners. The rescue team would consist of 12 special operations soldiers, supported by helicopter gunships and medical evacuation aircraft. Marcus was assigned to the rescue team as a guide, despite medical recommendations that he remain at the base for additional recovery time. His knowledge of the terrain and the enemy positions was considered essential for the mission's success. He would carry minimal equipment and would be escorted by 2 soldiers whose primary responsibility was to protect him during the operation. The rescue team spent the entire night planning their approach to the target area. Satellite imagery and drone reconnaissance had revealed significant enemy activity around the original ambush site, but also showed possible locations where prisoners might be held. The mission would begin before dawn to maximize the element of surprise and minimize exposure to enemy fire. Marcus tried to sleep before the mission, but found himself unable to rest. He kept thinking about his missing teammates and wondering what condition they might be in if they were still alive. Capture by enemy forces in this region often meant torture and execution, but sometimes prisoners were held for propaganda purposes or prisoner exchanges. At 3 in the morning, the rescue team began their final preparations. Each member checked their equipment multiple times, reviewed the mission plan, and confirmed communication procedures. Marcus was equipped with lightweight body armor, a radio, and a sidearm for self-defense. His primary role was to identify locations and guide the team, not to participate in combat operations. The helicopter flight to the target area took 45 minutes through mountainous terrain that required careful navigation to avoid enemy detection. Marcus looked out the window at the landscape below, recognizing many of the features he had struggled across during his escape. The perspective from above made his 4-day journey seem even more remarkable. As they approached the insertion point, Marcus could see the village where he had hidden during his first night alone. Smoke was still rising from several buildings, and there appeared to be more activity than when he had observed it from the mountainside. The helicopter crews reported seeing armed individuals moving between buildings, confirming that enemy forces were still active in the area. The team was inserted at a landing zone approximately 3 kilometers from the ambush site, far enough away to avoid immediate detection, but close enough to reach their objective quickly. Marcus immediately recognized the terrain and was able to orient the team toward their first search area. His confidence in navigating the landscape impressed the special operations soldiers who were accompanying him. The first location they searched was a small compound where intelligence suggested prisoners might be held. The buildings were empty except for evidence of recent occupation, including food scraps, blankets, and makeshift sleeping areas. Bloodstains on the floor suggested that injured people had been present, but there was no way to determine if they were friend or foe. Marcus found items that belonged to his missing teammates scattered around the compound. Corporal Williams's helmet was lying in one corner, and pieces of uniform fabric were caught on barbed wire outside the building. These discoveries confirmed that at least some of his squad had been captured alive after the ambush, but provided no information about their current location or condition. The rescue team methodically searched each building in the compound, looking for additional clues about where the prisoners might have been taken. They found maps of the local area with several locations marked, possibly indicating other sites where captives were being held. The intelligence officer with the team photographed everything for later analysis. Moving to the second search location required crossing open terrain where the team would be vulnerable to observation and attack. Marcus guided them along a route that provided maximum cover while still allowing reasonable progress toward their objective. His knowledge of the area proved invaluable in avoiding potentially dangerous situations. The second location was a larger compound built into the side of a mountain, with natural defensive advantages that would make any assault extremely difficult. Through binoculars, the team could see guards patrolling the perimeter and evidence of significant activity inside the compound. This appeared to be a major enemy position rather than a simple holding facility for prisoners. As they observed the mountain compound, Marcus spotted something that made his heart race. In a small courtyard visible through the perimeter fence, he could see several figures who appeared to be bound and sitting on the ground. The distance was too great to identify specific individuals, but the presence of apparent prisoners at this location was encouraging news. The team leader, Captain Rodriguez, made the difficult decision to call for additional support before attempting to assault the mountain compound. The defensive position was too strong for 12 soldiers to overcome without significant casualties, and the presence of prisoners made the situation even more complex. Any assault would need to minimize the risk to captives while neutralizing the enemy guards. While waiting for reinforcements, Marcus and the team continued observing the compound and gathering intelligence about guard positions, defensive measures, and possible escape routes. They counted at least 20 enemy fighters visible around the perimeter, with unknown numbers inside the buildings. Heavy weapons positions were clearly visible, including at least 2 machine gun nests covering the main approaches. During this observation period, Marcus witnessed something that filled him with both hope and anguish. One of the bound figures in the courtyard was moved to a different location, and, for a brief moment, Marcus could see the person's face clearly through his binoculars. It was Corporal Williams, alive but obviously injured and in poor condition. The confirmation that at least one of his teammates was still alive motivated Marcus to push for immediate action, even though tactical considerations suggested waiting for additional support. Captain Rodriguez understood Marcus's urgency, but maintained his position that a hasty assault would likely result in the deaths of both the prisoners and the rescue team members. Additional forces arrived by helicopter 2 hours later, including heavy weapons specialists and medical personnel trained in treating combat casualties. The expanded rescue team now had the capability to assault the mountain compound with reasonable chances of success, though the operation would still involve significant risks. The assault plan called for a coordinated attack from multiple directions, with special emphasis on quickly securing the area where prisoners were being held. Marcus would remain in a protected position during the initial assault, then move forward to help identify and assist his rescued teammates once the compound was secured. As the rescue team prepared for their assault, Marcus thought about the promises he had made to his wife and daughter. The mission was necessary to save his captured teammates, but it also put him back into mortal danger just when he had reached safety. He prayed that his family would understand why he needed to take this risk. The sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the mountains as the final preparations were completed. Marcus checked his equipment one last time and prepared to guide the rescue team into what would likely be the most intense combat operation of his military career. The success or failure of the mission would determine whether his surviving teammates would ever see their families again. Captain Rodriguez gave the final briefing to all team members, emphasizing the importance of precise execution and the protection of prisoner lives. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility for his teammates' survival, knowing that his guidance and local knowledge would play a crucial role in the operation's outcome. The assault began with suppressing fire from helicopter gunships targeting the enemy defensive positions. Marcus watched as rockets and machine gun fire struck the compound, creating clouds of smoke and debris that would provide cover for the ground assault. The sound was deafening, and the visual impact was overwhelming even from his protected position. Ground forces moved in from 3 directions simultaneously, using the terrain features that Marcus had identified to approach the compound with minimal exposure to enemy fire. The battle was intense but brief, as the surprise attack and superior firepower quickly overwhelmed the enemy defenders. Marcus moved forward with the medical team as soon as the compound was declared secure. What he found in the prisoner holding area would stay with him for the rest of his life, challenging everything he thought he knew about survival, courage, and the bonds between soldiers in combat. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chin never thought he would see his hometown again. As he crouched behind the crumbling wall of what used to be a school in the mountains of Afghanistan, the sounds of gunfire echoed through the valley below. His radio crackled with static, but no voices came through. For the 3rd day, he had been completely cut off from his unit. The mission was supposed to be simple. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was hiding in a remote village near the Pakistani border. Marcus and his squad of 8 soldiers were tasked with conducting reconnaissance and calling in coordinates for an airstrike. What they found instead was an ambush that scattered his team across the rocky terrain. Marcus touched the dried blood on his forehead, where shrapnel had grazed him during the initial attack. His left shoulder throbbed from where he had hit the ground hard, diving for cover behind a boulder. The memory of that moment played over and over in his mind. The sudden crack of sniper fire, the explosion that sent dirt and rocks flying in every direction, the desperate shouts of his teammates as they scrambled for safety. Now, 3 days later, he was alone in enemy territory with limited ammunition, no communication, and no clear idea of where his fellow soldiers were. His water supply was running low, and the small amount of field rations he carried would not last much longer. The temperature dropped significantly at night in these mountains, and his torn uniform provided little protection against the cold. Marcus carefully peered around the edge of the wall. The village below appeared quiet, but he knew better than to trust appearances. During his years of military service, he had learned that silence often meant danger was nearby. His training had taught him to be patient, to observe, and to think before acting. These skills would now determine whether he lived or died. The village consisted of about 20 small stone buildings clustered around a central dirt road. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, indicating that people were still living there despite the recent violence. Marcus could see movement in some of the windows, but from his position, he could not determine if they were civilians or enemy combatants. His mind drifted to his wife Sarah and their 5-year-old daughter Emma back in Colorado. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and Emma had just started kindergarten. Before deploying, Emma had drawn him a picture of their family standing in front of their house, with a big yellow sun shining overhead. He kept that picture folded in his chest pocket, right next to his heart. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him. Sarah was counting on him to come home safely. Emma was too young to fully understand why Daddy had to go away, but she had made him promise to return in time for her 6th birthday in 2 months. Those promises now seemed impossibly distant. Marcus checked his equipment methodically. He had his standard-issue M4 carbine with approximately 60 rounds of ammunition remaining. His sidearm, a Beretta M9, contained 1 full magazine. He also carried a combat knife, a first aid kit, and a small handheld GPS device that had stopped working after the explosion. His night vision goggles had been damaged in the fall, leaving him to rely on natural light and his own instincts. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Marcus knew he needed to make a decision. He could remain hidden and hope that a search and rescue team would find him, or he could attempt to reach friendly forces on his own. The problem was that he had no idea where friendly forces were located. During the briefing before the mission, his commanding officer had mentioned that there was a small outpost about 30 kilometers to the south. However, getting there would mean traveling through unknown terrain filled with potential threats. The alternative was to try reaching the extraction point where helicopters were supposed to pick up his team, but he was not sure if anyone would still be waiting there. Marcus decided to rest until dawn and then begin moving toward the southern outpost. He found a concealed position among some large rocks where he could observe the village while remaining hidden. As darkness fell, he wrapped his jacket tightly around himself and tried to stay warm. Sleep came in brief, restless periods. Every sound made him alert and ready to defend himself. The howling of wild dogs in the distance reminded him that he was far from civilization. Once, he heard the rumble of vehicles on a road somewhere below, but he could not see them in the darkness. When morning came, Marcus felt stiff and cold, but his determination remained strong. He carefully planned his route, using the terrain features he could see to avoid open areas where he might be spotted. The mountains provided natural cover, but they also slowed his progress and made navigation difficult. As he prepared to leave his hiding spot, Marcus heard voices coming from the village below. He could not understand the words, but the tone suggested urgency. Through his binoculars, he saw several men carrying weapons moving between the buildings. They appeared to be searching for something or someone. Marcus realized that his presence in the area had not gone unnoticed. The enemy knew he was somewhere nearby, and they were actively hunting for him. This changed his situation dramatically. He could no longer move slowly and carefully. Speed had become more important than stealth. He began climbing higher into the mountains, away from the village and the searching men below. The rocky terrain was difficult to navigate, but it also provided excellent cover. His military training had included mountain warfare, and he drew upon those skills now to move efficiently across the challenging landscape. After several hours of climbing, Marcus reached a ridge that offered a clear view of the surrounding area. Far in the distance, he could see a road with occasional vehicle traffic. That road might lead to the southern outpost, but reaching it would require descending into a valley where he would be exposed and vulnerable. As he studied the route options, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. His heart raced with hope that it might be a search and rescue mission looking for him and his missing teammates. However, as the sound grew closer, he realized it was coming from the wrong direction. The helicopter appeared over a nearby ridge, and Marcus could see that it was not an American aircraft. The enemy was using air support to expand their search for him. He quickly took cover among some large boulders and remained perfectly still as the helicopter passed overhead. The sound of the rotors faded, but Marcus knew they would be back. The enemy was taking his presence seriously enough to commit significant resources to finding him. This told him that either his mission had been more important than he realized, or the enemy viewed any American soldier in their territory as a serious threat. Marcus continued his journey south, moving carefully from one piece of cover to the next. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the temperature began to rise. He rationed his water carefully, taking only small sips when absolutely necessary. Dehydration in this environment could be just as dangerous as enemy bullets. Around midday, Marcus discovered a small stream flowing down from the mountains. The water appeared clean, and he desperately needed to refill his water bottles. He approached the stream cautiously, checking the surrounding area for any signs of danger. After determining that the area was clear, he quickly filled his bottles and moved to a concealed position to rest. While resting by the stream, Marcus allowed himself to think about his teammates. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been serving his third deployment and was supposed to rotate home next month. Private Johnson was only 19 years old and had joined the Army straight out of high school. Corporal Williams had a new baby daughter he had never met. The thought of these men being captured or killed motivated Marcus to push forward despite his exhaustion. The afternoon brought new challenges. The terrain became more rugged, and Marcus had to navigate around several deep ravines that blocked his path. Progress was slow, and he began to worry that he would not reach safety before his supplies ran out completely. As evening approached, Marcus found himself on another high ridge with a view of the valley below. In the distance, he could see lights that might indicate a settlement or military installation. However, he could not determine if it was friendly or hostile territory. The risk of approaching the wrong people could be fatal. Marcus decided to observe the distant lights overnight and look for clues about their origin. American installations typically had specific lighting patterns and security measures that might be visible from a distance. Enemy positions might show different characteristics that would warn him away. He found a sheltered position among some rocks where he could rest while maintaining observation of the target area. As night fell, the lights became more distinct, and Marcus began to see patterns that gave him hope. The arrangement and intensity of the lights suggested a formal military installation rather than a random civilian settlement. However, Marcus knew that hope could be dangerous if it led to careless decisions. He would need to approach very carefully and confirm the identity of the installation before revealing himself. One mistake could mean capture, torture, or death. During the night, Marcus was awakened by the sound of gunfire in the distance. The shots were sporadic and seemed to come from multiple locations. He wondered if other members of his team were still alive and fighting, or if local conflicts were creating the violence he heard. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Marcus wanted to investigate the gunfire, but doing so would mean deviating from his plan to reach the southern outpost. He also had no way of knowing if moving toward the sound would help his teammates or simply get him killed. As dawn approached, Marcus made the difficult decision to continue toward the distant lights rather than investigate the gunfire. His best chance of helping his teammates was to reach friendly forces and report their last known location. A rescue mission would have a much better chance of finding survivors than one wounded soldier operating alone. The morning brought clear skies and good visibility. Marcus could now see that the distant installation was indeed a military base, complete with perimeter fencing, guard towers, and vehicle compounds. However, he still could not identify which military force controlled the facility. Marcus spent several hours observing the base through his binoculars. He watched the movement patterns of guards, noted the types of vehicles in the compound, and looked for any identifying markers that would indicate nationality. The base appeared well organized and professionally operated, which could indicate either American or enemy forces. Finally, Marcus spotted something that filled him with relief and excitement. On the roof of one building, he could clearly see an American flag flying in the morning breeze. The installation was definitely under friendly control. After 4 days of uncertainty and danger, he had found safety. However, Marcus knew that approaching the base incorrectly could still result in him being shot by nervous guards who might mistake him for an enemy infiltrator. He needed to approach in a way that clearly identified him as an American soldier in need of assistance. Marcus began his careful descent toward the base, planning his route to avoid any defensive positions or areas where guards might perceive him as a threat. He would announce himself from a safe distance and follow any instructions given by the security personnel. As he moved closer to the base, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because his ordeal was almost over, and anxiety because he still did not know the fate of his teammates. The questions about their survival would not be answered until he reached the base and could report the situation to his superiors. The base grew larger as Marcus approached, and he could see that it was more substantial than he had initially realized. There were multiple buildings, several helicopter landing pads, and what appeared to be a communications center with large antenna arrays. This was clearly a major installation with the resources needed to mount a rescue operation. Marcus reached a position about 500 meters from the base perimeter where he could clearly see the main gate and guard positions. He took a deep breath, checked his weapon to ensure it was in a safe position, and prepared to announce his presence to the guards. Standing up slowly with his hands partially raised to show he was not an immediate threat, Marcus began walking toward the gate. His heart pounded with anticipation as he prepared to end his 4-day survival ordeal and begin the process of finding his missing teammates. The guards at the gate had spotted him and were raising their weapons in a defensive posture. Marcus knew the next few moments would be crucial. Any sudden movement or misunderstanding could result in tragedy, even though he was finally within sight of safety. Marcus stopped walking and called out in a loud, clear voice, identifying himself as an American soldier in need of assistance. He waited for a response from the guards, knowing that his long journey through enemy territory was about to end, but uncertain about what news awaited him regarding his fellow soldiers.